So the Federal Reserve is actually an illegal entity functioning within government.
It's illegal, and what we have given to this so-called agency is the authority to counterfeit money.
Do you have any points of view about the Federal Reserve and how the Federal Reserve operates?
They just enter something on a computer. Oh, you need 20 billion today. Here's 20 billion. But they got that out of thin air. It came out of thin air. It goes to the Treasury. The Treasury then pays the bill.
And welcome to the hearings this morning, Chairman Bernanke. Obviously, the world, and especially we in this country, have come to realize that we're facing a financial crisis, and I think very clearly it is worldwide. That, of course, is the first step in looking toward solutions, but I would like to remind the committee and others that there were many who anticipated this not a year or two ago when the crisis became apparent, but actually 10 years plus ago when this was building. The problem obviously is the major problem is obviously in the subprime market, but you know, in one particular decade there was actually an increase in $8 trillion worth of value in our homes, and people interpreted this as real value, and $3 trillion was taken out and spent. So we do live in an age which is pushed by excessive credit, and I think that is where our real culprit is. But traditionally, when an economy gets into trouble, and they have inflation or an inflationary recession, the interpretation is always there's not enough money. We can't afford this, we can't afford that. And the politics and the emotions are designed to continue to do the same thing that was wrong that caused our problem in the first place. That is, it looks like we don't have enough money. So what does the Congress do? They appropriate $170 billion and they push it out in the economy and think that's going to solve the problem. We don't have $170 billion, but that doesn't matter. We can borrow it or we can print it if we need be. But then again, the financial sector puts pressure on the Fed to say, well, there's not enough credit. What we need to do is expand the credit. But what have we been doing for the past 2 years? You know, it used to be that we had a measurement of the total money supply, which I found rather fascinating, and still a lot of people believe it's a worthwhile figure to look at, and that is the M3. 2 years ago, the M3 number was $10.3 trillion. Today, it's 14.6. Just in 2 years, there's been an increase in the total money supply of $4.3 trillion. Well, obviously, if you pump that much money into the economy and we're not producing, but the money we spend comes out of borrowed money against houses where the housing prices are going down, and that's interpreted increasing our GDP, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to come back and put more pressure on the Congress and on the Fed to say what we need is more inflation. Inflation is the problem. That has caused the distortion, that has caused the malinvestment, and that is why the market is demanding the correction in the malinvestment and the excessive debt, which is not market driven.
All countries who have ever attempted to create money on thin air, the currency is eventually destroyed.
Gentleman from Texas, the ranking member of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Bernanke, earlier you were asked a question about the value of the dollar, and you sort of deferred and said, you know, that's the Treasury responsibility. I always find this so fascinating because it's been going on for years. Your predecessor would always use that as an excuse to not talk about the value of the dollar, but here I find the chairman of the Federal Reserve, who's in charge of the dollar, in charge of the money, in charge of what the money supply is going to be, but we don't deal with the value of the dollar. But you do admit you have a responsibility for prices. But how can you separate the two? Prices are a mere reflection of the value of the dollar. If you want to control prices, then you have to know the value of the dollar. But if you're going to avoid talking about the dollar, then all you can do then is deal with central economic planning. You know, if we stimulate the economy, maybe there'll be production and prices will go down. And if prices are going up too fast, you have to bring on a recession. You have to try to balance these things, which I think is a totally impossible task and really doesn't make any sense, because in a free market, if you had good economic growth, you never want to turn it off. because good economic growth brings prices down, just like we see the prices of computers and cell phones. Those prices come down where there's less government interference. But you know, the hard money economists who have been around for a while, they have always argued that this would be the case. Those who want to continue to inflate will never talk about the money, because it isn't the money supply that is the problem. It's always the prices. And that is why the conventional wisdom is everybody refers to inflation as rising prices, instead of saying inflation comes from the unwise increase in the supply of money and credit. And when you look at it, and I mentioned in my opening statement that M3, now measured by private sources, is growing by leaps and bounds. In the last 2 years, it increased by 42%. Currently, it's rising at a rate of 16%. That is inflation. That will lead to higher prices. So to argue that we can continue to do this, to continue to debase the currency, which is really the policy that we're following, is purposely debasing, devaluing a currency, which to me seems so destructive. It destroys the incentives to save. It destroys, and if you don't save, you don't have capital. Then it just puts more pressure on the Federal Reserve to create capital out of thin air in order to stimulate the economy. And usually that just goes into malinvestment, misdirected investment into the housing bubbles or the NASDAQ bubble. And then the effort is, once the market demands the correction, what tool do you have left? Let's keep pumping, pump, pump, pump. And it just is an endless task. And history is against you. I mean, history is on the side of hard money. If you look at stable prices, you have to look to the only historic sound money that's lasted more than a few years. Fiat money always in. Gold is the only thing where you can get stable prices. For instance, in the last 3 to 4 years, the price of oil has tripled. A barrel of oil, $20, $30 up to $100 a barrel. And yet, if you look at the price of oil in terms of gold, it's absolutely flat. It's absolutely stable. So if we want stable prices, we have to have stable money. But I cannot see how we can continue to accept the policy of deliberately destroying the value of money as an economic value. It's so immoral in the sense that, what about somebody who's saved for the retirement and they have CDs and we're inflating the money at a 10% rate? Their standard of living is going down, and that's what's happening today. The middle class is being wiped out, and nobody's understanding that it has to do with the value of money. Prices are going up. So how are you able to defend this policy of deliberate depreciation of our money?
What happened to gold in Fort Knox?
Nobody really knows. When I served on the Gold Commission, I asked them to really, do another audit. I remember it was 15-2. They said, we don't need to audit the gold.
I've been told that the Federal Reserve has taken control of the gold as collateral for the dollars they print.
They miss gold on their balance sheet.
How could the Federal Reserve, this private bank, miss gold on the balance sheet?
They claim they're holding that for the Treasury.
So that puts private bankers in control of the American gold. They could have taken all of America's wealth.
That's a possibility.
Shouldn't the Congress stand up and say, where is the American people's gold?
They're not audited.
They control the money of America, and it's not audited?
There is no audit.
Oh, wait a second. Doesn't the Federal Reserve work underneath the Congress?
Congress ignores their responsibility to do any oversight.
Thank you. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. We hear that in the future we're going to have a better economy, and everybody hopes so, but it's hard to believe. It's hard for me to believe anyway, because I look back on our past 3 years, and what Congress has done and what the Fed has done, we've literally injected about $5.3 trillion, and I don't think we got very much for it. The national debt went up $5.1 trillion. Real GDP grew less than 1%. So I don't think we've gotten a whole lot. Unemployment really hasn't recovered. We still have 7 million people that have become unemployed. And one statistic that is very glaring, if you look at the chart, is how long people are unemployed. The average time used to be 17 weeks. Now it's nearly 40 weeks they stay unemployed. So nothing there reassures me. And also, when we talk about prices, we're always reassured there's not all that much inflation, and we're told that they might start calculating inflation differently with a new CPI. Of course, we changed our CPI a few years back. There's still a free market group that calculates the CPI the old-fashioned way, and they come up with a figure, in spite of all this weak economy, that prices have gone up 35%, 9.4% every year. And I think if you just went out and talked to the average housewife, she'd probably believe the 9% rather than saying it's only 2%. So I would say what we have been doing isn't very reassuring with all this money expenditure. But my question is related to the overall policy. Spending all this money hasn't helped, and yet many allies that would endorse so much of what's been going on, whether it's the Fed or the Congress, they recognize that consumer spending is very, very important, and they concentrate on that. But the $5.1 trillion didn't go to the consumers. It went to buying bad assets. It went to bailing out banks. It went to bailing out big companies. And lo and behold, the consumer didn't end up getting this. They lost their job, and they lost their houses and mortgages, and they're still in trouble. But my question is, if you took that $5.1 trillion and said that consumer spending is good, you could have given every single person in this country $17,000. Why is it the program of both the Congress and the Fed to direct the money to the people who have been making a lot of money, instead to the people who, if you argue that the consumer needs to spend the money, I obviously don't advocate this, but I would suggest, you know, maybe it could have worked better. It couldn't have worked any worse. But what is the reason we direct it toward the banks and the big corporations, too big to fail, and we don't pay that much attention to the consumer if it's true, and I don't know if you agree with that or not, that consumer spending is an important issue?
Is there a law that requires people to file a 1040?
Not explicitly, but it's certainly implied.
Well, implied by force.
Yeah.
But is there a law?
I can't cite a law, no, I cannot. But, you know, if they think it's the law and they have all the guns, you know, it's an authoritarian approach.
Well, yeah, but that's authoritarianism.
Yeah.
That's not a country run by law. Do you think America is going deeper and deeper into becoming a police state? And if so, in what ways do you see that as a congressman?
Yeah, I think we're moving in that direction because there's not much we can do without permission. The absence of a police state is that people are free, and if you don't commit crimes, you can do what you want. But today, you can't open up a business, you can't develop land, you can hardly do anything. You can't go to the bank, you can't go to the doctor without the government knowing what you're doing. And they talk about medical privacy, that's gone. Financial privacy, that's gone. The right to own property, that's essentially gone. So you have to get permission from the government from almost everything. And if that is the definition of a police state, that you can't do anything unless the government gives you permission, we're well on our way. This is something that people eventually, I hope, will get sick and tired of and say, you know, enough is enough.
The reason why most people expect it to be quite different is the country is already quite different. I believe there are literally millions of more people now concerned about the very things I talked about 4 years ago. It is fascinating because in the last campaign, it was very obvious that young people were attracted to the message I was delivering. And rightfully so, they should be, because as far as I'm concerned, they're getting dumped on. A lot of problems. They're expected to pay a lot of taxes and not get a lot of remuneration back, and difficulty getting jobs.